A farmer's son saved a wild horse from barbed wire, but the next day, a billionaire rancher's helicopter landed at his door. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The pale Montana dawn had barely broken over the Blackwood Ranch when Ethan Miller awoke to the sound of his father's truck rumbling to life. The 17-year-old rancher's son had been dreaming of escaping this hardscrabble life since he was old enough to understand that some people lived without counting every penny. But despite his dreams of something more, this morning was like every other. Chores waited for no one, especially not on a struggling cattle ranch. "Ethan, feed run," his father called from downstairs, his voice carrying the weathered edge of a man who'd spent decades fighting the elements. Ethan pulled on his worn jeans and flannel shirt, the fabric soft from years of wear. His bedroom window offered a view of the eastern pasture, where the first golden rays of sunlight touched the tips of the tall grass, making the morning dew sparkle like scattered diamonds. Beyond their modest 80 acres lay the sprawling empire of Westland Ranch, thousands of acres owned by Harrison Westland, a billionaire who'd made his fortune in tech before buying up half the county. "Coming, Dad," Ethan called back, pushing thoughts of Westland from his mind as he thundered down the stairs. Jack Miller stood by the door, his leathery face creased with worry lines that seemed to deepen with each passing season. At 53, he looked 20 years older, bent slightly from decades of physical labor and the weight of keeping their small ranch afloat in an industry increasingly dominated by corporate operations. "Storm's brewing," Jack said, nodding toward the western horizon where dark clouds gathered ominously. "Better get the south pasture feed done before it hits," Ethan nodded, grabbing a piece of toast his mother had left on the counter. Sarah Miller worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital to help keep the ranch afloat. Her absence was a familiar ache in the house. "I'll take the ATV," Ethan said. "Cover more ground." His father hesitated, then nodded. Fuel was expensive, but time was precious when storms threatened. "Check the fence line by the creek while you're out there. That old barbed wire's been giving way." 20 minutes later, Ethan was bouncing across the southern pasture on their ancient ATV, the feed distributor rattling behind him. Their small herd of cattle, 37 head in total, moved toward him in anticipation. These animals represented everything: college tuition that wouldn't materialize, repairs they couldn't afford, and a legacy that was slowly slipping through their fingers like the dry Montana soil. The wind picked up as Ethan finished feeding, carrying the unmistakable smell of rain. He turned the ATV toward the creek that marked the boundary between Blackwood Ranch and the untamed wilderness beyond. Their property backed up against federal land, miles of rugged terrain where wild horses still roamed free. Ethan had always felt a connection to those horses. Their freedom called to something deep within him, something that yearned to break away from the invisible fences of expectation and responsibility. The creek was swollen from spring runoff, churning brown and angry as it carved its path through the landscape. Ethan dismounted, walking the fence line as his father had instructed. The barbed wire was old, installed by his grandfather decades ago. In places it sagged between posts. In others, it had been repaired so many times it resembled a metallic patchwork quilt. That's when he heard it, a high-pitched whinny of distress cutting through the wind. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the terrain until he spotted movement about 50 yards downstream. His heart sank at the sight. A wild stallion, magnificent even in distress, was thrashing against the barbed wire fence. The horse's coat was the color of burnished copper, its black mane whipping wildly as it struggled. With each movement, the barbed wire cut deeper into its flesh. Without hesitation, Ethan sprinted toward the trapped animal. The stallion's eyes rolled with fear as he approached, its powerful muscles bunching as it prepared to flee or fight. "Easy, easy," Ethan called, his voice deliberately soft and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm here to help you." The stallion reared as much as its trapped position allowed, front hooves pawing the air dangerously close to Ethan's head. Blood streaked the animal's hindquarters, where the barbed wire had sliced through its hide. Ethan knew approaching from the front was suicide. Instead, he circled wide, moving slowly into the horse's peripheral vision. His father had taught him about horses since before he could walk. "They're prey animals," Jack always said. "Fear drives them. You gotta be calmer than still water to earn their trust." The rain began to fall as Ethan inched closer. Fat drops that quickly intensified into a steady downpour. He was soaked within minutes, but his focus remained entirely on the trapped stallion. "I know you're scared," he murmured, "but that wire's only going to cut deeper if you keep fighting." Whether it was Ethan's tone or simple exhaustion, the stallion's struggles gradually subsided, though its flanks still heaved with exertion and fear. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan moved closer, now just a few feet from the powerful animal. From his pocket, he pulled out the wire cutters he carried during fence checks. The stallion's ears flicked back at the metallic sound as Ethan opened and closed them once. "This will free you," Ethan promised, though he knew the horse couldn't understand his words. "But you've got to stay still." As if accepting the help, the stallion held relatively steady as Ethan carefully reached toward the first strand of wire wrapped around its back leg. The barbs had dug deep, and fresh blood welled with each subtle movement. With precise cuts, Ethan began freeing the horse one strand at a time. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, running into his eyes, but he blinked it away impatiently. His fingers grew numb with cold, making the delicate work even more challenging. A particularly deep barb made the stallion flinch as Ethan worked it free, sending a powerful hindquarter directly into Ethan's shoulder. The impact knocked him backward into the mud, the wind temporarily driven from his lungs. The stallion could have trampled him then. One hoof to his chest would end everything. Instead, the magnificent animal stilled, as if recognizing Ethan's vulnerability. Their eyes met through the curtain of rain, and something passed between them. A moment of understanding that transcended the natural boundaries between wild and tame. Catching his breath, Ethan slowly regained his footing and returned to his task. One by one, he cut away the strands of barbed wire, carefully extracting each barb from the stallion's flesh. Blood mixed with rainwater, staining his hands crimson as he worked. After what felt like hours but was likely only 20 minutes, the final strand fell away. The stallion was free. For a breathless moment, neither moved. The horse stood trembling, its wounds bleeding but no longer bound. Ethan remained perfectly still, wire cutters hanging loosely at his side. Then, with a toss of its magnificent head, the stallion took one tentative step away from the fence. Finding itself truly free, it turned to look directly at Ethan. There was no gratitude in those wild eyes. Wild things don't think in such human terms. But there was recognition. A momentary connection that Ethan knew he would remember for the rest of his life. With a powerful surge, the stallion galloped away, disappearing into the wilderness beyond the creek. The rain began to ease, as if nature had been holding its breath along with Ethan. Soaked to the bone and shivering, Ethan returned to the ATV. His shoulder throbbed where the horse had struck him, and his hands were scraped raw from the barbed wire. But as he drove back toward the ranch house, he felt a sense of satisfaction that transcended the physical discomfort. His father was waiting on the porch when Ethan pulled up, worry etched across his weathered face. "Where the hell have you been?" Jack called out. "Storm's getting worse." Ethan killed the ATV's engine and dismounted gingerly, his shoulder protesting the movement. Found a wild stallion caught in the fence, copper-colored. Had to cut him free. Jack's expression shifted from concern to understanding. He'd taught his son to respect all living creatures, especially those magnificent enough to still run free. "You hurt?" Shoulders bruised, nothing broken. Ethan climbed the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. His father nodded, placing a hand on Ethan's uninjured shoulder. Get cleaned up. Your mother called. Hospital sent her home early because of the storm. She's making that potato soup you like." That evening, as rain lashed against the windows of their modest ranch house, the Miller family sat around the kitchen table. The warm soup chased away the last of the chill from Ethan's bones as he recounted the rescue in detail. His mother listened with concern, examining his shoulder with professional efficiency before declaring he'd have an impressive bruise but no lasting damage. "Never seen a horse that color around here," Jack mused. "Must be from the herd that ranges north of Devil's Canyon." "He was beautiful, Dad," Ethan said, the memory vivid in his mind. "Proud even when he was trapped." Sarah smiled at her son's enthusiasm. "Sounds like someone else I know." Later, lying in bed listening to the storm gradually subsiding outside his window, Ethan replayed the rescue in his mind. The wild stallion's eyes, the moment of connection, the powerful surge as it raced to freedom. These images followed him into his dreams, where he ran alongside the copper-colored horse across endless Montana plains. He couldn't have known then how this single act of compassion would change everything. Couldn't have imagined that by this time tomorrow, his family's future would take a turn as dramatic and unexpected as the summer storm that now spent its fury against the sturdy walls of their home. Morning broke clear and brilliant, the storm having washed the world clean. Ethan rose early as always, his bruised shoulder stiff but manageable. The day promised the usual routine of chores, maintenance, and the 1,000 tasks that kept a small ranch functioning. Or so he thought, until the distant thump-thump-thump of helicopter rotors echoed across the valley. Helicopters weren't unheard of in this part of Montana, but they rarely approached Blackwood Ranch. Usually they belonged to wealthy hunters, wildlife researchers, or occasionally emergency medical services. This helicopter was different. Sleek, black, and unmistakably expensive. The kind that belonged to someone for whom money was no object. Ethan stood in the barnyard, shielding his eyes against the sun as the aircraft descended toward their property, kicking up a small cyclone of dust and debris. His father emerged from the barn, expression guarded as he moved to stand beside his son. "Who the hell?" Jack muttered, his body tense with the instinctive wariness of a man who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. The helicopter touched down in the open area beyond their modest ranch house. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the door slid open and a tall figure emerged. Even from a distance, Harrison Westland was unmistakable. The billionaire rancher owned the massive Westland Ranch that bordered several smaller properties, including the Millers. In his mid-60s, Westland moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. His silver hair caught the morning sunlight as he ducked under the still-turning rotors and strode purposefully toward them. Behind him followed a younger man in an expensive suit, clutching a leather portfolio and looking distinctly uncomfortable in the dusty ranch setting. "Why is Harrison Westland landing a helicopter on our property?" Ethan asked, not expecting an answer. His father's jaw tightened. "Guess we're about to find out." Harrison Westland stopped a few paces away from Jack and Ethan, his weathered face unreadable beneath his custom Stetson hat. Despite his age, he stood tall and imposing, a physical reminder of the power he wielded in Clearwater County. His clothes were deceptively simple, a button-down shirt, well-worn jeans, and hand-tooled boots, but Ethan recognized the subtle markers of wealth. Nothing ostentatious, just quiet quality that probably cost more than their monthly mortgage payment. "Jack Miller," Westland said, extending his hand. His voice carried the gravelly texture of someone who'd spent decades giving orders and expecting them to be followed. Jack hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. "Harrison. Been a while." "Too long," Westland agreed, though his tone suggested this was mere politeness rather than genuine sentiment. His sharp blue eyes shifted to Ethan. "And this must be your boy." "Ethan," Jack confirmed. "My son." Westland studied Ethan with unexpected intensity as if taking his measure. Heard you had quite an adventure yesterday, son. Confusion flickered across Ethan's face. How could Westland possibly know about the stallion? The rescue had happened less than 24 hours ago, on their private property, during a storm. The younger man in the suit stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. Mr. Westland would like to discuss a matter of some importance with you both. Perhaps somewhere we could sit? Sarah Miller appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The expression on her face mirrored the wariness Ethan felt growing in his chest. We can talk in the house, Jack offered reluctantly. The small group made their way toward the modest ranch home, its white paint peeling in places from the harsh Montana elements. Inside, the house was clean and comfortable, if outdated. The living room furniture showed signs of careful maintenance rather than replacement. Family photos lined the walls, generations of Millers working the same land. Coffee? Sarah offered, her nurse's training evident in her composed demeanor despite the unexpected visitors. Thank you, ma'am, Westland replied with unexpected courtesy. The suited man declined with a tight smile. Once they were seated, the Millers on their worn sofa, Westland in an armchair, and the suit perched uncomfortably on a wooden chair from the dining room, an awkward silence fell. Jack broke it. Not to be rude, Harrison, but helicopters don't typically land on my property without good reason. Westland's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Direct as always, Jack. He leaned forward slightly. I'm here about a horse. A stallion, to be precise. Copper-colored, black mane and tail. I believe your boy encountered him yesterday. All eyes turned to Ethan, who shifted under the scrutiny. He was caught in our fence line by the creek. I cut him free. You did more than that, Westland said. You saved an animal worth more than this entire ranch. Jack's expression hardened. If you're suggesting my son trespassed or interfered with your livestock... Westland raised a hand. Nothing of the sort, Jack. That stallion isn't mine, not technically. He turned to his assistant. Show them. The suited man opened his leather portfolio and extracted a glossy photograph, which he handed to Jack. Ethan leaned over to see. The image showed the same copper-colored stallion he'd freed, though without the cuts and panic. The horse was magnificent, its powerful build and proud carriage evident even in a still photograph. His name is Thunderbolt, Westland explained. He's a Kiger Mustang, one of the rarest wild horse bloodlines in America. 3 years ago, he escaped during a Bureau of Land Management roundup. Wildlife photographers have spotted him occasionally, but no one's been able to get close. Until your son. I didn't get close by choice, Ethan clarified. He was trapped and injured. Westland nodded. Which makes what happened next all the more remarkable. My head wrangler was out checking fence lines after the storm and witnessed the whole thing from the ridge above. Said he'd never seen anything like it. The way you handled that stallion. The way it responded to you. Sarah set coffee mugs on the table. I'm sorry, Mr. Westland, but why exactly does this matter to you? Call me Harrison, please. Westland took a sip of coffee before continuing. I've been trying to introduce Kiger Mustang bloodlines into my breeding program for years. They're hardy, intelligent horses with exceptional endurance, perfect for ranch work. But they're exceedingly rare, and the genuine wild-born specimens are nearly impossible to gentle. Thunderbolt's not just any Kiger, the assistant interjected, clearly warming to his subject. His lineage traces directly to the original Spanish horses brought to the Americas. DNA testing from hair samples we've collected confirms it. He's possibly the most genetically valuable wild horse in Montana. Jack set his coffee down carefully. I'm still not clear on why you're here, Harrison. Westland leaned back, studying the family. I want to hire your son. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. Hire me? Ethan echoed. For what? To help capture and gentle Thunderbolt, Westland replied simply. What you did yesterday Gaining the trust of a wild stallion in distress, that's a rare gift. My wrangler said the horse could have killed you a dozen times over, but something in your manner calmed it. Jack's expression darkened. My son's 17. He has school. It's summer break, Ethan reminded his father, a strange excitement building in his chest. And he has responsibilities here, Jack continued, ignoring the interruption. Westland nodded. I understand family obligations better than most, Jack, but I'm prepared to make this worth your while. He turned to his assistant, who produced a folded document from his portfolio. My offer is simple, Westland continued. Ethan works for me for the summer. His only job is to help capture and gentle Thunderbolt. In return, I'll pay him $50,000. Sarah gasped softly. Jack's face remained impassive, but Ethan saw his father's hands tighten almost imperceptibly. $50,000. The figure echoed in Ethan's mind. It was more money than he'd ever imagined having. Enough for college tuition, enough to fix the aging tractor and repair the barn roof, enough to ease the constant financial pressure that squeezed his family like a vice. And if I can't catch him? Ethan asked, finding his voice. Or if I can't gentle him? Westland's gaze was steady. The payment isn't contingent on success. It's for your honest effort and exclusive commitment for the summer. Though I suspect you're capable of more than you realize. The suited assistant cleared his throat. There's also a bonus structure. 10,000 additional for successful capture, another 10 for initial gentling, and a final 10, if Thunderbolt can be integrated into the breeding program. 70,000 total, Sarah murmured, her nurse's practicality calculating mortgage payments and medical bills. Jack stood abruptly. We need to discuss this privately. Westland rose smoothly. Of course, we'll wait outside. When the door closed behind the visitors, Jack turned to his family, his expression troubled. I don't like it. Dad, it's $70,000, Ethan said, still struggling to comprehend the figure. It's not about the money, Jack replied, though they all knew that wasn't entirely true. Westland doesn't do anything unless it benefits him tenfold. That horse must be worth a fortune if he's willing to pay that much. Sarah placed a hand on her husband's arm. We need to be practical, Jack. This could pay off the second mortgage. Ethan could go to college without crushing debt. And what happens when Ethan delivers this miracle horse to Westland? You think he'll be satisfied with just one favor? Jack shook his head. Men like him, they think they can buy people. I won't be bought, Ethan said firmly. But I can do this, Dad. I know I can. Jack studied his son's face. This isn't just about catching a horse. Once you step onto Westland property, you're entering his world. The rules are different there. I'll be careful, Ethan promised, and it's just for the summer. Jack turned away, moving to the window where he could see Westland and his assistant standing beside the helicopter. The billionaire was surveying the Miller property with the calculating eye of someone who saw the world in terms of assets and acquisitions. That man has wanted to absorb our ranch into his empire for years, Jack said quietly. He's offered to buy us out 3 times. This was news to Ethan. Why didn't you sell? Jack turned, his expression softening as he looked at his son. Because some things matter more than money. This land has been in our family for 4 generations. Your great-grandfather homesteaded here when this was still frontier. We don't have much, but what we have means something. Sarah joined her husband at the window. And we want to give Ethan choices we never had. A heavy silence fell as the implications hung in the air. Ethan understood what remained unspoken. His parents had sacrificed everything to keep this ranch, to give him a legacy, but they didn't want that legacy to become a burden that trapped him, as it had sometimes trapped them. It's my choice, Ethan said finally, and I want to do this. Not just for the money, but because... He struggled to articulate the feeling that had gripped him when he looked into the stallion's wild eyes. Because I felt something out there. A connection, like it was meant to happen. His parents exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Finally, Jack nodded. We'll hear Westland out, but we'll have conditions. When they invited Westland back inside, Jack's demeanor had changed. He sat straighter, his voice firmer. We're interested, but we have terms. Westland's expression remained neutral, but Ethan caught a flicker of something, surprise perhaps in the billionaire's eyes. Men like Harrison Westland weren't accustomed to conditions. I'm listening, Westland said, folding his hands in his lap. Jack laid out the terms with quiet authority. First, Ethan continues to live at home. He can work your schedule, but he sleeps in his own bed. Westland nodded. Reasonable, though there may be overnight tracking expeditions. We can discuss those as they arise. Second, Jack continued, Ethan gets Sundays off, non-negotiable. Family day. Another nod from the billionaire, though more reluctant. Third, and most important, Jack leaned forward, his gaze locked with Westland's. If Ethan does manage to gentle this horse, you will provide documented proof of humane treatment for as long as the animal lives on your property. We want regular updates, visitation rights, and your word that Thunderbolt will never be sold to another party. The suited assistant shifted uncomfortably, but Westland's expression remained composed. You care about the horse's welfare, Westland observed. I respect that. I can agree to your terms with one addition of my own. He turned to Ethan. If you succeed in gentling Thunderbolt, I'll grant you lifetime breeding rights to his bloodline for your own stock, should you ever decide to raise horses of your own. The offer stunned Ethan. Breeding rights to a horse of Thunderbolt's caliber were potentially worth far more than the cash payment. That's generous, Jack admitted, clearly caught off guard. Westland shrugged. It's good business. The boy has a gift. I recognize its value. He extended his hand to Ethan. Do we have a deal, young man? Ethan glanced at his parents, receiving a subtle nod from both, then shook Westland's hand firmly. Yes, sir. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, Westland replied, standing. 7 sharp. My helicopter will pick you up. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Miller, wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. This won't be easy. With that, the billionaire and his assistant departed, the thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades soon fading into the distance, leaving the Miller family to absorb the extraordinary turn of events. Did that really just happen? Ethan asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over the living room. Sarah laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to the sound. Apparently, billionaires can change your life over morning coffee. Jack remained silent, his expression troubled despite the potential windfall. Ethan knew his father well enough to recognize the worry lines etched around his eyes. I'll be careful, Dad, he promised. I won't let Westland take advantage of me. Jack sighed heavily. It's not you I'm worried about, son. It's him. He gestured in the direction the helicopter had disappeared. Men like that? They're playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. Just keep your eyes open. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of preparation and speculation. Ethan carefully packed his gear, selecting his most durable work clothes and breaking in a new pair of gloves his mother insisted on purchasing from their emergency fund. An investment, she called it, her practical nurse's mind already allocating the promised payment toward bills and necessities. That night, Ethan found sleep elusive. His mind raced with possibilities, replaying his encounter with Thunderbolt and imagining the challenge ahead. Somewhere out in the vast Montana wilderness, the Copper Stallion roamed free, unaware that its destiny had become intertwined with Ethan's own. Dawn broke clear and brilliant, Montana's big sky a canvas of pink and gold. Ethan was already awake, watching from his bedroom window as the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern horizon. By the time the distant sound of helicopter rotors echoed across the valley, he was dressed and ready, a mixture of nervousness and excitement churning in his stomach. His parents waited with him outside, Jack giving last-minute advice that Ethan was too keyed up to properly absorb. Sarah hugged him tightly, whispering, "Be amazing," in his ear before releasing him. The sleek black helicopter touched down in the same spot as yesterday. This time, Westland remained inside, visible through the cockpit window. A ranch hand Ethan didn't recognize emerged instead, gesturing for him to board. With a final wave to his parents, Ethan ducked under the rotors and climbed aboard. The interior was luxuriously appointed, with leather seats and polished wood accents. Westland sat across from him, already engrossed in paperwork, spread across a small fold-down table. "Morning," the billionaire said without looking up. "We'll be at the ranch in 10 minutes. Ethan had never flown before, and despite his nervousness about the job ahead, he couldn't help but press his face to the window as the helicopter rose. The landscape unfolded beneath them, patchwork fields, winding creeks, and the rugged wilderness beyond. From this height, he could see the stark contrast between the modest farms like his family's and the vast, meticulously maintained operation that was Westland Ranch. The main compound came into view, and Ethan's eyes widened. The ranch house was actually a sprawling mansion of timber and stone, surrounded by immaculate grounds. Beyond it stretched a complex of barns, stables, training arenas, and worker housing, all connected by paved roads. It looked less like a working ranch and more like a small, self-contained town. The helicopter bypassed the main house, landing instead near the largest of the barn complexes. As the rotors slowed, Westland finally looked up from his paperwork. "Welcome to Westland Ranch," he said, his expression unreadable. "Cody will get you situated." Cody turned out to be a weathered cowboy in his early 30s who waited for them outside the helicopter. With sun-bleached hair and the lean build of someone who spent his life in the saddle, he had the quiet competence of a seasoned wrangler. "This is Cody Blackburn, my head horse trainer," Westland explained as they disembarked. "He'll be working with you directly on this project." Cody's handshake was firm, his assessment of Ethan swift and professional. "Boss says you've got a way with wild horses," he said, his tone neutral, but eyes skeptical. "I helped one," Ethan clarified, not wanting to oversell his experience. "That's all." A hint of approval flickered across Cody's weathered features. "Honest. Good start." He turned to Westland. "We've got the morning meeting in 5. Westland nodded. "Get Ethan oriented. I want a full briefing on Thunderbolt's last known whereabouts and your capture strategy." With that, the billionaire strode toward the main building already on his phone. Cody watched him go, then turned back to Ethan. "First thing you need to know, this isn't a normal ranch job. Westland runs this place like a corporation. Morning meetings, progress reports, the works." "Is that bad?" Ethan asked, shouldering his backpack. Cody shrugged. "Different. Efficient." He started walking, indicating for Ethan to follow. "Second thing, that horse you freed is worth millions, potentially. Westland's been trying to integrate Kiger Mustang bloodlines into his breeding program for years." Ethan quickened his pace to keep up with Cody's long strides. "My dad figured it was something like that. Said Westland wouldn't pay so much unless the horse was worth way more." "Smart man. Your dad." Cody led them into the largest barn Ethan had ever seen. Unlike the weathered, practical structure on his family's ranch, this was a state-of-the-art facility with climate control, advanced security systems, and pristine conditions. Each stall was spacious and immaculate, occupied by horses whose combined value probably exceeded the GDP of small countries. "These are Westland's prize breeding stock," Cody explained, noting Ethan's awestruck expression. "Quarter horses mostly, with some thoroughbred and Andalusian bloodlines." They passed stall after stall of magnificent animals, each one representing generations of careful breeding. At the far end of the barn, Cody stopped before what appeared to be a high-tech conference room built right into the structure. Inside, a team of people were already assembled around a large table. Ethan recognized the suited assistant from yesterday, now looking more comfortable in this corporate setting. The others were an eclectic mix, some dressed like wranglers, others in professional attire that seemed out of place on a ranch. "Our tracking and capture team," Cody explained quietly. "Wildlife biologists, BLM consultants, horsemen, and a few suits from the main office." Westland sat at the head of the table, commanding the room without effort. He nodded to Cody and Ethan as they entered. "Everyone, this is Ethan Miller," Westland announced. "He'll be joining the Thunderbolt project." A murmur ran through the group, and Ethan felt their evaluating gazes. He was acutely aware of his worn jeans and scuffed boots amid their more polished appearance. "Miller's the one who freed the stallion during yesterday's storm," Westland continued. "Cody's wrangler witnessed the interaction. The horse trusted him, or at least didn't kill him when it had the chance." A woman in her 40s with short gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of her life outdoors spoke up. "No offense to the kid, but one encounter doesn't make him a horse whisperer. We've been tracking Thunderbolt for months using scientific methods." "Dr. Reynolds makes a valid point," the suited assistant agreed. "The statistical probability of capturing a wild stallion of Thunderbolt's intelligence based on a single interaction is virtually nil." Ethan felt his face flush. They were right, of course. Who was he to think he could contribute anything to this team of experts? "Valid concerns," Westland acknowledged, "which is why Miller will be working with Cody, not leading the operation." He turned to the large screen on the wall, which displayed a topographical map of the region. "Now, let's review what we know about Thunderbolt's territory and movement patterns." For the next hour, Ethan listened as the team discussed the stallion's habits, preferred grazing areas, and the small band of mares he'd gathered. They had camera trap footage, satellite tracking data of the herd's movements, and detailed knowledge of the terrain. It was impressive, methodical, and, Ethan realized with growing certainty, completely missing the point. When there was finally a pause in the discussion, Ethan found himself speaking up. "You're tracking him like he's just data points, not a living creature with instincts and intelligence." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Ethan swallowed hard but continued. "Thunderbolt isn't just running random patterns. He's deliberately avoiding your cameras and traps. Look." He stood and approached the map, pointing to specific areas. "He's using ridgelines to spot your teams before they spot him. He's crossing rocky ground to avoid leaving tracks. He's smart, smarter than you're giving him credit for." Dr. Reynolds narrowed her eyes. "And you determined all this from one encounter?" "No," Ethan replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "I determined it from your own data. You just weren't seeing the pattern." A tense silence hung over the conference room. Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he realized he'd just contradicted a team of experts in front of their billionaire boss. Dr. Reynolds' expression had hardened. The suited assistant looked mortified, and several others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Then Westland laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "This," he said, pointing at Ethan, "is exactly why I brought him in." He stood, moving to the map. "Show me again, son. What patterns are you seeing?" Encouraged, Ethan traced the stallion's movements across the topographical display. "He's not just wandering. See how he circles back here and here? He's checking if he's being followed. And these routes across the rocky plateau, they're harder to traverse, but they don't hold tracks. He's deliberately covering his trail." Dr. Reynolds stepped closer, skepticism still evident in her pinched expression, but now tinged with reluctant curiosity. "You're suggesting he's demonstrating evasive intelligence beyond normal wild horse behavior?" "I'm suggesting he's survived this long for a reason," Ethan replied. "And it's not just luck." "Cody, who had been quietly observing from the back, nodded slowly. "Kid's got a point. We've been chasing Thunderbolt like he's any other Mustang. He's not." Westland clasped his hands behind his back, studying the map with renewed interest. "So if we were to adjust our approach based on this perspective, what would you suggest, Miller?" All eyes turned to Ethan again, but this time with a different quality to their attention. He took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Stop chasing him," Ethan said simply. "You're reinforcing his avoidance patterns. Instead, we need to understand his routine, find where he feels safe, and establish a presence there that doesn't threaten him." "That could take months," the suited assistant protested. "It would," Ethan agreed. "But you've already been trying for months with no success, and summer doesn't last forever." Westland studied Ethan with an evaluating gaze. "Cody, take Miller and a small team out today. Scout the areas he's identified. Let's see if his theory holds water." The billionaire turned to Dr. Reynolds. "Adjust the camera trap placements according to Miller's insights. I want new data by tomorrow." The meeting dispersed with a new energy, team members breaking into smaller groups to recalibrate their approach. As people filed out, Cody clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Bold move, challenging Reynolds like that. She's got 2 PhDs and 20 years of wildlife research under her belt." Ethan felt his face flush. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. It just seemed obvious from the data." "Sometimes it takes fresh eyes," Cody replied. "Meet me at the South Stable in 20. Pack water and lunch. We'll be out all day." An hour later, Ethan found himself riding through rugged backcountry alongside Cody and 2 other wranglers. The horse beneath him, a steady bay gelding named Copper, was a far cry from the temperamental quarter horse he occasionally rode at home. This animal moved with the confident responsiveness of extensive training, navigating the difficult terrain with ease. "Reynolds is still fuming," one of the wranglers, a lanky man named Travis, commented as they rode. "Says Westland's bringing in unqualified labor to override scientific methodology." "She'll get over it if the kid's right," the other wrangler, Marco, replied with a shrug. "Results speak louder than credentials out here." Ethan kept his eyes on the landscape, trying to ignore their discussion of him, as if he weren't present. The Montana wilderness stretched before them, vast and seemingly untouched. Rocky outcroppings gave way to lush valleys, stands of pine creating dark green pools of shadow against the golden grasslands. Cody led them to the first location Ethan had identified, a hidden meadow nestled between 2 ridgelines, with a clear spring bubbling up from rocky ground. "This is where you think he's bedding down?" Cody asked, dismounting. Ethan slid from his saddle, legs slightly stiff from the long ride. "It makes sense. Protected position, good visibility of approaches, water source, and grazing." He pointed to the ridgelines. From up there, he'd see anyone coming from miles away. The 4 men spread out, examining the area in silence. Ethan moved toward the spring, kneeling to inspect the ground around it. Soft mud captured impressions well, and he was rewarded almost immediately. "Tracks," he called out. "Multiple horses. Recent. Within the last day or 2. Cody joined him, studying the hoof prints with an expert eye. "Good catch. Different sizes. Mares and at least 1 larger set. Could be our boy." They spent the next hour documenting the discovery, setting up a small, unobtrusive camera trap well away from the spring. Cody was methodical, careful to minimize their impact on the site. "We don't want him to know we've found this place," he explained as they prepared to leave. "No human scent markers near the water, no disturbed grass if we can help it." Their next stop was a rocky plateau that Thunderbolt had crossed several times according to the tracking data. Here, too, they found subtle signs of the horse's passage. A few strands of copper-colored hair caught on a thorny bush, droppings that Cody estimated to be 3 days old. By late afternoon, they had confirmed 3 of Ethan's theoretical locations as actual sites used by the stallion and his small band of mares. The mood among the team had shifted from skepticism to cautious respect. As they sat eating a late lunch in the shade of a massive pine, Cody regarded Ethan thoughtfully. "You've got good instincts. That's not something you can teach." "My dad," Ethan explained between bites of his sandwich. "He always said to think like the animal, not like a human trying to outsmart it." "Smart man," Cody nodded. "Most people overthink it. Animals are complex but straightforward. They want safety, food, water, and for Mustang stallions, mares." He took a swig from his canteen. "The trick isn't outsmarting Thunderbolt. It's earning his trust." Travis snorted. "Good luck with that. Wild Mustangs his age don't gentle easy, especially stallions. Westland's throwing money at a pipe dream." "Maybe," Cody conceded. "But I saw what happened during that storm. The horse could have trampled the kid, but it didn't. That's something." As they packed up to continue their scouting, Ethan felt a growing confidence. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying in a way that ordinary ranch chores never had been. Here, his observations mattered. His instincts were valued. They were traversing a narrow game trail through dense underbrush when Cody suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. The entire party froze, horses standing obediently still. Cody pointed silently toward a clearing about 200 yards ahead. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There, illuminated in a shaft of late afternoon sunlight, stood Thunderbolt. The stallion's copper coat gleamed like burnished metal, his black mane flowing as he tossed his proud head. Behind him, partially obscured by trees, several mares grazed peacefully. The stallion hadn't noticed them yet, but he was alert, ears flicking constantly as he monitored his surroundings. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the healing cuts on his hindquarters where the barbed wire had sliced him. "Don't move," Cody whispered. "Wind's in our favor. He hasn't scented us." For several breathless minutes, the men remained frozen, watching the magnificent animal. Ethan felt a connection that transcended the physical distance between them. This wasn't just a valuable horse or a challenging project. This was a creature of incredible spirit and intelligence, living on its own terms in one of the last truly wild places. Then, as if sensing their presence despite the favorable wind, Thunderbolt's head snapped up. His nostrils flared, testing the air. For one heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought the stallion was looking directly at him. With a piercing whistle, Thunderbolt alerted his mares. The small band instantly gathered, and with a thunder of hooves, they disappeared into the forest. "Damn," Travis muttered. "He sensed us somehow." Cody shook his head in amazement. "Never seen anything like it. It's like he's got a sixth sense." They pressed on, tracking the herd's direction until dusk began to settle over the landscape. Finally, Cody called a halt. "We'll lose the light soon. Time to head back." As they rode toward the ranch, Ethan's mind was filled with the image of Thunderbolt standing in that shaft of sunlight, wild, powerful, and free. The challenge ahead seemed even more daunting now that he'd seen the stallion in his natural environment. The sun was setting by the time they returned to Westland Ranch, painting the mountains in brilliant hues of orange and purple. As they dismounted at the stables, a ranch hand approached Cody. "Boss wants to see you and the kid right away," he said. "In the main house." Cody raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "We just got back." The hand shrugged. "Said it was urgent. Something about a new development." After quickly refreshing themselves and changing into clean shirts kept in the Wrangler's quarters, Cody and Ethan made their way to Westland's mansion. Up close, the structure was even more impressive, a modern interpretation of a traditional lodge, with soaring timber beams and walls of glass that reflected the dramatic sunset. A housekeeper met them at the door, leading them through a great room with cathedral ceilings to Westland's private study. The billionaire sat behind an enormous desk, crafted from a single slab of burled maple, his attention focused on a speakerphone conversation. "I don't care what environmental impact statements you need to file. Westland was saying, his tone sharp. "The mineral rights are clear, and I want those surveys completed by the end of the month." He looked up, noticing them, and abruptly ended the call. "Gentlemen," he greeted, his demeanor shifting seamlessly. "I hear you had quite a productive day." Cody nodded. Kid's instincts were solid. We confirmed 3 of his predicted locations and got a visual on Thunderbolt and his band. Westland's eyes lit with interest. "Condition of the horse?" "Good," Ethan replied. "The wire cuts are healing. He's moving well, alert. Has 5 mares with him that we could see." "Excellent." Westland leaned back in his chair. "And this new approach, you believe it has merit?" Cody glanced at Ethan before answering. "I do. Conventional methods haven't worked. The stallion's too smart, too wary. Building a presence gradually, letting him grow accustomed to us, it might be our only shot." Westland nodded slowly, considering. "Time is a factor. I have investors interested in this breeding program." He turned his gaze to Ethan. "But I'm willing to adjust our timeline if you genuinely believe this approach will work." Before Ethan could respond, Westland's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I need to take this. We'll continue tomorrow." He answered the call, effectively dismissing them. As they walked back toward the stables, Ethan replayed the brief interaction in his mind. What was that about mineral rights? Cody's expression was carefully neutral. Westland's interests go beyond horses. There's talk of significant mineral deposits in parts of the county, rare earth elements used in electronics. Valuable stuff. On his land? Some, Cody replied. But he's been acquiring mineral rights from other property owners too. He gave Ethan a sidelong glance. Including land adjacent to federal wilderness areas. The implication hung in the air between them as they parted ways. That night, as Ethan rode back to his family's ranch in one of Westland's trucks, he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. What else was the billionaire after? And how did Thunderbolt, and by extension, Ethan himself, fit into those larger plans? The next week passed in a blur of early mornings and exhausting days in the field. Each morning, Westland's driver would pick Ethan up at dawn, and each evening, return him home long after sunset. The pattern quickly became his new normal. Scouting expeditions, tracking sessions, and increasingly productive strategy meetings where even Dr. Reynolds had begun to acknowledge his contributions, albeit reluctantly. They'd established a network of observation posts at the locations Ethan had identified, documenting Thunderbolt's movements with minimal intrusion. The data confirmed what Ethan had suspected. The stallion was far more intelligent and methodical than anyone had given him credit for, following patterns that seemed random to casual observation, but revealed a sophisticated survival strategy when mapped properly. "He's teaching the mares," Ethan explained during the Friday morning briefing, pointing to footage from one of their hidden cameras. The grainy night vision video showed Thunderbolt leading his small band across a rocky outcropping, carefully placing his hooves in a specific pattern. The mares behind him followed exactly in his footsteps. "He's showing them how to move without making noise or leaving tracks," Ethan continued. "It's deliberate." Dr. Reynolds, who had initially dismissed Ethan's theories, now leaned forward with interest. "This supports recent research on complex social learning in equids, but I've never seen it so clearly demonstrated in wild mustangs. Fascinating." Westland, who had been largely absent during the week, attended this particular meeting. His presence changed the dynamics of the room, adding an undercurrent of tension to the otherwise collaborative atmosphere that had developed. "This is all very educational," the billionaire said, his tone measured but impatient. "But we're no closer to capturing the stallion. Your new approach has generated data, not results." Cody cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, we are making progress. The herd is growing accustomed to our observation posts. They're grazing longer in areas where we've established a scent presence." 2 weeks, Westland replied, checking his watch. That's how long I'm willing to continue with this softly approach. After that, we go back to conventional methods. His gaze settled on Ethan. I hope your instincts prove correct, Miller. For everyone's sake. After the meeting, Ethan found himself alone with Cody in the stable area, preparing for another day in the field. What did he mean by that? Ethan asked, tightening the cinch on his saddle. For everyone's sake? Cody's expression was guarded as he checked his own tack. Westland doesn't handle disappointment well. People who fail to deliver tend to find themselves suddenly unemployed. He adjusted his hat, avoiding Ethan's gaze. And sometimes their reputations don't survive the experience. The warning hung in the air between them as they rode out, a 4-person team that included Marco and a quiet wrangler named Luis, who specialized in tracking. Their destination was a hidden valley Ethan had identified as a possible safe haven for Thunderbolt's band, remote enough to feel secure but with good escape routes and plentiful grazing. As they crested the ridge overlooking the valley, Ethan's breath caught. There, beside a small, meandering stream, was Thunderbolt. The stallion stood at alert, clearly serving as lookout while his mares grazed peacefully. The morning sun burnished his copper coat to a brilliant gold, and even from this distance, Ethan could see the proud arch of his neck, the power in his stance. Luis whistled softly. Magnifico. He is everything they say. Down, Cody commanded in a harsh whisper, and all 4 riders immediately dismounted, dropping below the ridgeline. We can't risk him spotting us. This is the closest we've gotten without him bolting. They secured their horses and belly-crawled to the ridge, using a stand of juniper as cover. Through binoculars, Ethan studied the stallion and his band. There were 6 mares now, not 5, a new addition to the herd since their last sighting. We're downwind, Marco noted. He won't scent us unless the breeze shifts. For over an hour, they observed in silence, documenting the herd's behavior. Ethan was mesmerized by Thunderbolt's interactions with his mares, the gentle nudges, the clear communication, the protective vigilance. This wasn't just a horse, this was a leader, intelligent and devoted to his family. What's the next step? Luis asked eventually. We cannot stay here forever, just watching. Cody lowered his binoculars, turning to Ethan. Your call, kid. You gotten us this far. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The conventional approach would be to set up a trap, corral panels hidden among trees, bait to lure the horses in, and a trigger mechanism to close the gate behind them. But watching Thunderbolt's vigilance, Ethan knew such methods would likely fail. We need to make him curious about us, Ethan said slowly, forming the plan as he spoke. Right now, we're just another threat to avoid. We need to become something he wants to investigate. Marco looked skeptical. How do you make a wild stallion curious instead of terrified? Routine, Ethan replied, the idea crystallizing. Wild horses are creatures of habit, but they're also intensely curious about changes in their environment, as long as those changes don't seem threatening. He outlined his plan. They would establish a daily presence in the valley, but at a considerable distance from the herd's usual grazing areas. Every day, same time, same place, same people, same horses. They would bring feed but not attempt to bait the wild horses. They would simply exist in the space, predictable and non-threatening. Thunderbolt will notice us, Ethan explained. He'll watch us from a distance. Eventually, when we've become part of the landscape, he'll investigate. That's when we start gradually decreasing the distance. Cody considered the plan. It's unorthodox. Could take weeks. We have 2, Ethan reminded him. If it doesn't work by then, we try something else. After discussing the details, they retreated carefully, ensuring Thunderbolt never spotted them. Back at the ranch, Cody presented the plan to Westland's team. Dr. Reynolds expressed scientific interest in the approach, while the suited assistant, whose name Ethan had learned was Garrett, voiced predictable concerns about timelines and resources. Westland himself was absent, called away to Denver for business. In his absence, the team approved Ethan's plan, agreeing to implement it starting the following morning. That evening, as Ethan was driven home, exhaustion settled deep in his bones. The days of physical exertion, mental challenge, and navigating the complex dynamics of Westland Ranch had taken their toll. Yet despite the fatigue, he felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. His father was waiting on the porch when he arrived, a rare sight given Jack's own demanding schedule. "Long day?" Jack asked as Ethan climbed the steps. "Long week," Ethan replied, dropping onto the weathered bench beside his father. The peaceful evening sounds of their modest ranch, crickets chirping, the distant lowing of cattle, wrapped around him like a comfortable blanket. "Your mother's worried you're working too hard," Jack said, offering Ethan a cold bottle of root beer from the small cooler at his feet. "Says you barely eat dinner before falling asleep these days." Ethan accepted the drink gratefully. "It's intense, but I'm learning so much, Dad. Not just about horses, but about people, business, everything." Jack nodded slowly. "And Westland? What are you learning about him?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He took a long swallow of root beer, gathering his thoughts. "He's complicated, brilliant, demanding. Everyone's afraid of disappointing him." "And his interest in this horse still seem legitimate to you?" Ethan frowned. "The breeding program is real. Everyone on the ranch talks about it, but..." He hesitated, Cody's mention of mineral rights coming back to him. "I think there might be more going on. Westland's got other business interests in the area." Jack's expression darkened. "Like what?" "Something about mineral rights, rare earth elements." Ethan shrugged. "I don't have details." His father was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening landscape. "Blake Peterson stopped by yesterday," he finally said. "His family's ranch borders federal land, same as Thunderbolt's territory. Said Westland's been pressuring him to sell his mineral rights. When Blake refused, suddenly the bank started making noise about calling in his loans." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air ran down Ethan's spine. "You think there's a connection?" "I think Harrison Westland doesn't spend this kind of money and resources on a horse unless it somehow serves his larger interests." Jack turned to face his son directly. "Just be careful, Ethan. Keep your eyes open and remember where your loyalties lie." That night, Ethan lay awake long after he should have been asleep, his father's warning echoing in his mind. Through his window, he could see the stars scattered across the Montana sky like diamond dust. Somewhere out there, under those same stars, Thunderbolt roamed free. Whatever Westland's true motives, Ethan made a silent promise to the stallion and to himself. He would not be a pawn in someone else's game. If he succeeded in gentling Thunderbolt, it would be on terms that respected the horse's dignity and spirit. And if Westland's plans threatened the wild places where creatures like Thunderbolt belonged, Ethan would find a way to stand against them, no matter the cost. With that resolution firm in his mind, he finally drifted into sleep, dreaming of copper horses running free across endless plains. Dawn broke over the hidden valley, painting the landscape in soft gold and rose. Ethan sat cross-legged on a flat boulder, perfectly still, watching the eastern horizon. Behind him, Cody and Marco maintained their positions, equally motionless. Their horses grazed quietly nearby, secured by long lead ropes. This was the 5th consecutive morning they had enacted Ethan's plan, arriving before sunrise and establishing a peaceful presence at the exact same location, far enough from Thunderbolt's usual grazing areas to avoid triggering his flight response, but visible enough to be noticed. "Think he's watching us?" Marco whispered, breaking the silence. Ethan nodded slightly. "He's out there. Probably has been for an hour." As if to confirm his words, a familiar whinny echoed across the valley. On a distant ridge, barely visible against the brightening sky, stood the unmistakable silhouette of Thunderbolt. The stallion's head was high, ears pricked forward, studying them. Cody raised his binoculars slowly. He's closer than yesterday. Maybe 300 yards instead of 5. Progress, Ethan murmured, careful not to make any sudden movements. He's getting curious. Their routine was carefully choreographed. Arrive before dawn, set up in the same spot, lay out hay and feed for their own mounts, then simply exist in the space without any attempt to approach the wild horses. They would stay until mid-morning, then pack up and leave, only to return the following day to repeat the process. Today, however, brought a significant development. After watching them for nearly an hour, Thunderbolt descended from his observation point, moving cautiously into the valley with his band of mares following at a safe distance. The wild horses began grazing, gradually working their way closer to Ethan's position while maintaining a healthy buffer zone. "Don't react," Ethan whispered as the others noticed. "Just keep doing what we've been doing. Let him come to us on his terms." By mid-morning, the distance had shrunk to approximately 200 yards, close enough to clearly see Thunderbolt's healing wounds and the alert intelligence in his eyes as he periodically raised his head to assess the humans. When it came time to depart, Ethan moved with deliberate slowness, talking softly to his horse as he mounted. Before riding away, he turned to look at Thunderbolt one last time. The stallion stood alert, watching them go, his posture communicating curiosity rather than fear. "He's thinking about us," Ethan said as they rode back toward the ranch. "Trying to figure out what we're doing." Cody nodded. "It's working better than I expected. He's a smart one." "Too smart," Marco added. "Makes you wonder if we're the ones being trained." Back at Westland Ranch, their report of progress was met with mixed reactions. Dr. Reynolds was fascinated from a scientific perspective, immediately launching into a discussion about habituation behaviors in wild equids. Garrett, the assistant, seemed unimpressed, pointing out that they were still nowhere near capturing the stallion. Luis and the tracking team were cautiously optimistic. Westland himself had returned from Denver and received their update with a calculating expression, neither approving nor dismissing their approach. "Continue," was his only instruction, followed by a reminder. 9 days remaining. That afternoon, as Ethan helped exercise some of the ranch's training stock, Luis approached him with an unusual request. "Would you join me tonight? There is someone you should meet." The weathered tracker's expression was earnest. "Someone who knows these mountains, and the horses, better than anyone." Curious, Ethan agreed. After informing Cody of his plans, he accompanied Luis in his battered pickup truck, driving deep into the reservation lands that bordered part of the national forest. The sun was setting as they pulled up to a modest cabin surrounded by ancient cottonwood trees. "My grandfather," Luis explained as they approached the dwelling. "He was working with wild horses before any of us were born." The old man who greeted them looked to be in his 80s, his dark eyes sharp and knowing in a face mapped with wrinkles. He introduced himself simply as Joseph, inviting them inside with a gesture of gnarled hands. The cabin's interior was spare but comfortable, illuminated by the warm glow of kerosene lamps. After serving them coffee in chipped mugs, Joseph settled into a worn armchair, studying Ethan with unexpected intensity. "So you are the one who saved Ahote," he said finally. Ethan glanced at Luis in confusion. "Ahote," Luis translated. "It means restless one in my grandfather's language. It is what he calls the copper stallion." "Thunderbolt," Ethan clarified. "Yes, I helped free him from barbed wire during a storm." Joseph nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "And now the rich man wants you to capture him." It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. "To gentle him, yes, for a breeding program." The old man's expression revealed nothing. "And what does the boy from the small ranch want?" The question caught Ethan off guard. What did he want? The money, certainly. His family needed it desperately. Recognition, perhaps, the respect that came from succeeding where others had failed. But as he searched his feelings, he realized there was something more fundamental driving him. "I want to prove it can be done differently," Ethan said slowly, without breaking his spirit, without force. A hint of approval flickered in Joseph's eyes. Ahote is not like other horses. He carries the blood of the original Mustangs, the ones who came with the conquistadors. Some say such horses remember what it was to be wild in the old country before they crossed the Great Water. Luis translated, though Ethan had understood most of it. Joseph continued, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a storyteller. When the government men came with their helicopters and corrals, Ahote was just a young stallion. They captured his mother, his sisters. But he escaped, jumping a fence that should have been too high. Since then, he has eluded every attempt to take his freedom. He is cunning, this one. He learns. Ethan leaned forward, captivated. "That's what I've been trying to explain to the tracking team. He's not just running on instinct. He remembers, adapts." Joseph nodded. "The rich man will never catch him with machines and science. Ahote can only be approached through trust." He fixed Ethan with a penetrating gaze. "But ask yourself this, young one. If you succeed in winning his trust, will you betray it by delivering him to those who see him only as property?" The question struck Ethan like a physical blow, echoing his own private doubts. Before he could formulate a response, Joseph changed the subject, asking about Ethan's family and their ranch. The conversation flowed into less fraught territory, but the old man's challenge lingered in Ethan's mind. Later, as they prepared to leave, Joseph pressed something into Ethan's palm, a small leather pouch containing what looked like dried herbs. "When the moment comes, when you are close enough to touch him, burn a pinch of this," the old man instructed. "The smoke will calm him, remind his blood of ancient ceremonies when horses and men first formed their bond." Ethan tucked the pouch into his pocket, thanking Joseph sincerely. As they drove back toward the ranch, Luis was uncharacteristically quiet. "Your grandfather," Ethan said eventually, "he doesn't trust Westland, does he?" Luis's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "My people have learned to be cautious about rich men who suddenly develop interest in our lands." He hesitated, then added, "There are stories about Westland, about what happens to those who stand in his way." "What kind of stories?" Luis shook his head. "Just be careful, amigo. Remember that a horse like Ahote is worth millions to a man like Westland, not just for breeding, but for what capturing him might make possible." "I don't understand." "The territories where Ahote roams overlap with federal wilderness lands that many would like to see opened for development." Luis glanced at him meaningfully. "Lands that contain valuable minerals. If those areas were no longer classified as critical habitat for wild horses." He left the implication hanging as they arrived back at the ranch. Ethan thanked him for the introduction to Joseph, his mind churning with new questions and suspicions. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for continuing their work with Thunderbolt. As Ethan prepared for the day, he was surprised to learn that Westland would be accompanying them to the valley, the Billionaire's first time in the field since the project began. "Why now?" Ethan asked Cody as they saddled their horses. "He wants to see the progress firsthand," Cody replied, though his expression suggested there might be more to it. "Just follow the routine we've established. Pretend he's not even there." But Ethan could feel the additional pressure as they rode out, Westland keeping pace effortlessly on a magnificent black Andalusian stallion that probably cost more than Ethan's family home. The billionaire said little during the journey, his expression remote and calculating. When they reached their usual observation point, Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. The valley lay empty before them, no sign of Thunderbolt or his mares despite the ideal grazing conditions. "Where are they?" Westland demanded after 30 minutes of waiting. Ethan scanned the ridgelines, a knot forming in his stomach. Something spooked them. They should be here. As if in answer to his confusion, the distant sound of an engine echoed across the valley. Moments later, a BLM helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, flying low and fast. "What the hell?" Cody muttered, raising his binoculars. "That's not scheduled. We specifically requested no air operations in this area during our approach." Westland's expression remained neutral, but Ethan caught a flicker of something, satisfaction, in the billionaire's eyes. Before he could process this, the radio on Cody's belt crackled to life. "Tracking Team Alpha to base. We have visual on the target herd, moving southeast along Devil's Ridge. Appear to be heading for the Box Canyon. Over." A cold realization washed over Ethan. This wasn't coincidence. The helicopter was deliberately driving Thunderbolt's band toward the Box Canyon, a natural trap with only one entrance. Once the horses were inside, they could be easily corralled. "You planned this," Ethan said, turning to Westland. "You're using our approach as a distraction, while your other team drives them into a trap." Westland met his accusing gaze without flinching. "I'm using all available resources to achieve our objective. Your method was showing promise, but too slowly. This is a business decision, not a personal one." "You gave us 2 weeks," Ethan protested. "It's only been 5 days. And I've spent 5 days' worth of helicopter fuel and manpower with nothing to show for it except slightly reduced flight distances." Westland nodded toward the horizon where dust was rising, evidence of running horses. "Today, we'll have results." Ethan exchanged a look with Cody, whose tight expression confirmed what Ethan already suspected. The Wrangler had known about this plan, but had been ordered not to disclose it. As the dust cloud grew larger, signaling the approaching herd, Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest. Thunderbolt was running toward a trap, and Ethan had unwittingly helped set it. The thunder of hooves grew louder as Thunderbolt's band crested the ridge, driven relentlessly by the hovering helicopter. Ethan watched in dismay as the magnificent copper stallion led his mares in a desperate gallop toward the Box Canyon, directly into Westland's trap. Something snapped inside Ethan. Without conscious thought, he kicked his horse into motion, breaking away from the group. "Miller!" Westland shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" Ethan ignored him, urging his mount faster. Cody called out a warning, but that too was lost in the wind rushing past Ethan's ears. One thought consumed him. He couldn't let Thunderbolt be captured this way, through terror and trickery. His horse, sensing his determination, gave everything it had. They flew across the valley floor, cutting diagonally to intercept the wild herd before they reached the canyon entrance. The helicopter pilot spotted him and dipped lower, the radio crackling with angry demands to know who was interfering with the operation. Ethan was close enough now to see the fear in Thunderbolt's eyes, the foam flecking his heaving sides. The stallion had positioned himself between the helicopter and his mares, taking the brunt of the pursuit while trying to protect his family. 50 yards, 30, 20. Ethan knew he had one chance. He angled his horse to come alongside Thunderbolt, not directly in his path. The wild stallion registered his presence, nostrils flaring in recognition despite the chaos. "Brake right," Ethan shouted above the helicopter's roar, gesturing sharply with his arm. "Go right." Whether it was their previous connection, some equine understanding of Ethan's intent, or sheer desperation to find any escape route, Thunderbolt responded. The stallion veered sharply away from the canyon entrance, his mares following instantly. Ethan stayed with them, now effectively placing himself between the wild horses and the helicopter. The pilot, momentarily confused by this unexpected development, pulled up to avoid a collision. Those precious seconds were all Thunderbolt needed. He led his band toward a stand of dense pines that would provide cover from aerial pursuit. Ethan heard the furious voices over the radio, Westland's among them, ordering the pilot to ignore him and continue the drive. But the moment had passed. The wild horses disappeared into the trees, and the helicopter could only hover uselessly above the thick canopy. Heart pounding, Ethan wheeled his horse around to face the consequences of his actions. Westland and the others were galloping toward him, the billionaire's face a mask of cold fury. "You just cost me $1 million stallion," Westland said when he reached Ethan, his voice dangerously quiet despite the helicopter still circling overhead. Ethan straightened in his saddle. "You broke our agreement. We had a deal. 2 weeks to try my approach." "I don't explain my decisions to employees," Westland replied icily. "Especially not ones who directly disobey orders." "I'm not your employee," Ethan shot back. "I'm an independent contractor with specific terms, which you violated." Cody moved his horse between them, clearly trying to defuse the situation. "Sir, the herd is scattered but not lost. We can regroup, try again with a coordinated approach." "No." Westland cut him off. "There won't be a second attempt today." His cold gaze locked on Ethan. "You're done, Miller. Pack your things and get off my ranch." The helicopter landed nearby, kicking up dust that swirled around them like a physical manifestation of the tension. Westland turned his horse toward it. "What about our contract?" Ethan called after him. "The payment for my time?" Westland looked back over his shoulder. "You'll receive a prorated amount for days worked, minus damages for breach of contract. My legal team will be in touch." With that, he spurred his horse toward the helicopter, leaving Ethan with Cody and Marco in the sudden silence that followed. "You really stepped in it this time, kid," Marco said, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice. Cody's expression was more complex, concern mixed with something like respect. "Why'd you do it? You must have known he'd fire you." Ethan watched Westland's helicopter lift off. "It wasn't right, using fear to drive him into a trap after everything we've done to build trust." He turned to Cody. "You knew about this plan all along, didn't you?" The Wrangler had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Found out yesterday, was ordered not to tell you." "Because Westland knew I'd object." "Because it was need to know," Cody corrected, though without much conviction. After a moment, he added more softly, "But yeah, probably that too." They rode back to the ranch in strained silence. Ethan's mind raced, calculating what this disaster meant for his family. The promised payment, their financial salvation, was now in jeopardy. His father had been right to be wary of Westland's motives and methods. At the stables, Ethan dismounted and began removing his horse's tack with mechanical movements. The reality of his situation was sinking in. He'd thrown away a life-changing opportunity on principle, potentially leaving his family in an even worse position than before. "Don't be too hard on yourself," Cody said, approaching as Ethan finished brushing down his mount. "What Westland did today, that wasn't right. Using your approach to map the herd's patterns, then trying to run them down with helicopters." He shook his head. "That's not horsemanship. That's just business." "Doesn't change the fact that I failed," Ethan replied bitterly. "My family needed that money." Cody leaned against the stall door, considering Ethan thoughtfully. "You know, for what it's worth, I think you were getting through to that stallion. I've never seen anything like it, the way he recognized you today, even in all that chaos." Before Ethan could respond, Garrett appeared at the barn entrance. "Miller," the assistant called, his tone clipped. "Mr. Westland wants to see you in his office before you leave the property." Ethan's stomach tightened. More recriminations, probably, or perhaps some punitive legal threat. But he nodded, quickly washing up before following Garrett to the main house. The billionaire's office was cooler than the rest of the building, the air conditioning set to a temperature that necessitated the small fire burning in the stone hearth, despite the summer warmth outside. Westland stood at the window, gazing out over his empire, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "Sir," Garrett announced, "Ethan Miller is here." Westland didn't turn immediately. "Leave us," he instructed his assistant, who quickly complied. When they were alone, the billionaire finally faced Ethan. "Do you know what the most valuable quality is in the people I employ, Miller?" Ethan remained silent, unsure if the question was rhetorical. Loyalty, Westland continued, taking a sip of his drink. Not blind obedience, I have machines for that. Loyalty. The commitment to put the interests of the organization above personal feelings or opinions. He set his glass down on the desk with deliberate precision. Today you demonstrated the opposite of loyalty. I was loyal to the horse, Ethan replied, refusing to be intimidated, and to the agreement we made. A flicker of something, annoyance, respect, crossed Westland's face. An interesting perspective. Misguided, but interesting. He moved to his desk, pressing a button on his phone. Send them in. The office door opened, and Ethan was surprised to see Dr. Reynolds enter, followed by Luis. Both looked uncomfortable, clearly aware of the confrontation that had occurred in the field. Dr. Reynolds has been analyzing the data from our observation of Thunderbolt, Westland said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Luis has been tracking the herd's movements following today's incident. I've asked them to share their findings with both of us. Confused by this unexpected turn, Ethan looked to Dr. Reynolds, who cleared her throat nervously. The stallion's behavior patterns show remarkable adaptation, she began, her scientific detachment gradually asserting itself, particularly in response to Miller's approach. The data suggests he was forming a selective tolerance, not to humans generally, but specifically to Miller. Luis nodded in agreement. The tracks tell the same story. After today's helicopter drive, the herd scattered initially, but has already regrouped. They're returning to the same valley, just more cautiously. It's unprecedented. Normally, they would abandon the territory completely after such a disturbance. Westland watched Ethan's reaction carefully. Do you know what this suggests, Miller? Ethan shook his head, still wary of the billionaire's intentions. It suggests, Westland continued, that despite today's setback, your approach may still be our best chance of success. He leaned back against his desk. The stallion remembers you, recognizes you, perhaps even trusts you, in whatever limited way a wild animal can trust a human. Ethan's confusion deepened. I thought I was fired. You were, Westland confirmed, and you still are, technically, but I'm prepared to offer you a new arrangement. The billionaire outlined his proposal. Ethan would continue working to gentle Thunderbolt, but now as an independent contractor, rather than under Westland's direct authority. He would have complete autonomy in his approach, with no interference from helicopters or conventional capture methods. In return, his compensation would be entirely contingent on success. Nothing if he failed, but double the original amount if he succeeded. Why? Ethan asked when Westland finished. Why give me another chance after I deliberately undermined your operation? Westland's smile didn't reach his eyes. Because I recognize value, Miller, and because, unlike you, I don't let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Ethan hesitated, Joseph's warning echoing in his mind. If you succeed in winning his trust, will you betray it by delivering him to those who see him only as property? But then he thought of his family's struggling ranch, his mother's exhaustion from working double shifts, his father's weathered hands patching equipment that should have been replaced years ago. The doubled payment would transform their lives. One condition, Ethan said. When I gentle Thunderbolt, I have final approval on his living conditions, handling and use in your breeding program. Permanently, in writing. Westland's eyebrows rose slightly. Bold demand from someone in your position. Those are my terms, Ethan replied steadily. Take them or find someone else. For a long moment the office was silent except for the soft crackling of the fire. Then Westland laughed, a genuine sound of surprised amusement. You're either very foolish or very confident, Miller. He considered for another moment, then nodded. Very well. I'll have the agreement drawn up tomorrow. You can restart your efforts the day after. As Ethan left the mansion, the sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of copper and gold, colors that reminded him of Thunderbolt's gleaming coat. He felt oddly hollow, despite having salvaged the opportunity. He had won a second chance, but at what cost? And could he trust Westland to honor their new agreement any more than he had the first? The Miller family kitchen was unnaturally quiet as Ethan finished explaining the day's events and his new arrangement with Westland. His mother sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold, while his father leaned against the counter, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "So let me get this straight," Jack finally said, breaking the silence. "You defied a billionaire, got fired, then negotiated a deal where you either earned twice as much or nothing at all." Ethan nodded, bracing himself for his father's disapproval. Instead, Jack's weathered face creased into an unexpected smile. "That's either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever heard," he said, echoing Westland's sentiment but with genuine warmth rather than calculation. "I'm proud of you, son." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. "You stood up for what was right. That matters more than money." "But the money matters too," Ethan pointed out. "And now I might not earn any of it." "We'll manage either way," his mother assured him, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story about the toll their financial struggles were taking. "We always have." Later that evening, Ethan sat on the porch steps, watching night fall across their modest ranch. The contrast between the Miller property and Westland's vast empire had never felt so stark. Here, every fence post, every piece of equipment represented years of hard work and careful stewardship. Nothing came easily, but everything meant something. The screen door creaked open behind him, and his father stepped out, offering a bottle of beer. It was a rare gesture. Jack Miller wasn't one for encouraging teenage drinking, but tonight seemed to call for an exception. "Thanks," Ethan said, accepting the bottle. The cold glass felt solid and reassuring in his hand. Jack settled beside him on the steps. "Your grandfather would have done the same thing, you know, standing up to Westland like that." Ethan took a small sip of the bitter liquid. "I wasn't trying to be heroic. I just couldn't let it happen that way." "That's what makes it admirable," Jack replied. "Acting on instinct when your conscience tells you something's wrong." He gazed out at the darkening landscape. "You've got a connection with that stallion. I've seen it before. Rare, but real. Some people just have a way with certain animals, like they share a language no one else understands." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the familiar nighttime sounds of the ranch, crickets chirping, a distant coyote's call, washing over them. "Dad," Ethan said finally, "what do you know about rare earth minerals in this area?" Jack's expression sharpened. "Where'd that come from?" Ethan recounted the bits of information he'd gathered. Westland's conversation about mineral rights, Luis's comments about federal lands, the rumors about pressure on neighboring ranchers. His father listened intently, taking a long pull from his beer before responding. "There's been talk for years about deposits in the mountain range that includes Devil's Ridge and the territories where those wild horses roam. Valuable stuff used in electronics, military equipment. But most of it's under federal land. Protected wilderness. Can't be mined without changing the designation." "And if the wild horses were removed from that habitat?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected the answer. "One less reason to maintain the protected status," Jack confirmed grimly, "especially with the current administration looking to open more federal lands for resource development." The pieces were falling into place in Ethan's mind. So Thunderbolt isn't just valuable for breeding. Capturing him and his band helps clear the way for Westland to access those mineral deposits. It would be one factor, certainly. Jack set his empty bottle down. But proving that connection would be nearly impossible. Men like Westland are careful to keep their true motives hidden behind layers of legitimate business. Ethan thought about the new contract waiting for his signature. "What should I do?" Jack placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Keep your eyes open. Document everything. But most importantly, remember why you're doing this in the first place. For that horse, not for Westland." The next morning, Ethan drove himself to the ranch in his father's old pickup rather than waiting for Westland's driver. The symbolic assertion of independence wasn't lost on Cody, who met him at the stables with a knowing nod. "Heard you worked out a new arrangement," the head wrangler said, helping Ethan prepare for the day's expedition. "Pretty gutsy." "Or pretty stupid," Ethan replied, checking his saddle cinch. "Time will tell." Cody handed him a small backpack. "Equipment you requested. Camping gear, extra supplies. You sure about this solo approach?" Ethan nodded, slinging the pack over his shoulder. "Thunderbolt associates groups of riders with danger now. I need to rebuild trust one-on-one." His plan was both simple and audacious. He would travel alone to the valley where Thunderbolt's band had been sighted, make camp at a respectful distance, and simply exist in the stallion's territory without any attempt to approach or capture. Day after day, he would maintain this peaceful presence, gradually becoming part of the landscape rather than an intrusion upon it. The strategy risked the limited time remaining in his agreement with Westland, but Ethan was convinced it was the only way forward after the helicopter incident had shattered the fragile trust they'd begun to establish. The first 3 days yielded little. Ethan would occasionally spot Thunderbolt and his mares at a great distance, but the stallion kept his band well away from the human intruder. Each night, Ethan camped under the stars, the small fire's warmth a poor substitute for progress. On the 4th day, as dawn broke over the eastern ridge, Ethan spotted movement near the tree line. Thunderbolt stood watching him, alone this time, his copper coat gleaming in the early morning light. The stallion was closer than he'd ventured since the helicopter incident, close enough for Ethan to see the now-healed scars from the barbed wire along his hindquarters. Moving with deliberate slowness, Ethan went about his morning routine, building a small fire, preparing coffee, checking on his horse. All the while, he maintained a quiet, one-sided conversation, his voice soft and steady. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? Reminds me of that day by the creek. You were in pretty rough shape then, but look at you now. Those scars have healed nicely." Thunderbolt's ears flicked forward, capturing every word, though Ethan harbored no illusion that the horse understood his speech. It was the tone that mattered, the consistent gentleness that conveyed, "I am not a threat." For nearly an hour, the stallion observed from a distance. Then, with a soft snort, he turned and disappeared back into the trees. But the next morning he returned, watching from a slightly closer position. Days passed in this manner, each dawn bringing Thunderbolt a little nearer to Ethan's camp. On the 7th morning, the stallion appeared with 2 of his mares, gradually introducing them to the human presence he had deemed non-threatening. Ethan dutifully documented each interaction in a journal, noting behaviors, distances, and responses. He sent daily updates to the ranch via satellite phone, receiving minimal acknowledgement from Westland, but enthusiastic scientific interest from Dr. Reynolds. On the 10th day, as Ethan sat cross-legged by his morning fire, he felt rather than heard a presence behind him. Turning slowly, he found himself face to face with Thunderbolt, barely 20 feet away. The stallion stood perfectly still, nostrils flared as he scented the air, eyes locked with Ethan's. Neither moved for what felt like an eternity. Then, remembering Joseph's gift, Ethan very carefully reached into his pocket and withdrew the small leather pouch. With deliberate movements, he took a pinch of the dried herbs and sprinkled them onto the fire. A sweet, earthy smoke rose from the flames, carrying a scent that reminded Ethan of sage, cedar, and something unidentifiable. The breeze caught the smoke, carrying it toward Thunderbolt. The stallion's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Rather than startling, he extended his neck, inhaling deeply. His eyes, previously alert with wariness, softened almost imperceptibly. "That's it," Ethan murmured, keeping his voice low and soothing. "Nothing to fear here." In a moment that seemed to transcend ordinary experience, Thunderbolt took one step forward, then another. Ethan remained absolutely still, hardly daring to breathe as the magnificent animal approached until they were separated by mere feet. The stallion lowered his head slightly, at eye level with the seated human. This close, Ethan could see the intelligence in those dark eyes, could feel the stallion's breath, warm and steady in the cool morning air. Slowly, so slowly it was barely perceptible, Ethan raised his hand, palm open, offering but not reaching. The ultimate choice would be Thunderbolt's. Time seemed to suspend itself as the stallion regarded the outstretched hand. Then, with a delicacy that belied his size and power, Thunderbolt extended his muzzle and touched Ethan's palm with his velvet nose. The contact lasted only seconds, but it sent a current of connection through Ethan that he'd never experienced before. This wasn't submission or domestication. It was a conscious choice by a wild creature to initiate contact, to acknowledge the possibility of trust. When Thunderbolt finally stepped back and returned to his waiting mares, Ethan remained frozen in place, the ghost sensation of that velvet nose still tingling in his palm. Only when the horses had disappeared into the trees did he let out the breath he'd been holding, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. That night, as Ethan reported the breakthrough to the ranch, he downplayed the significance slightly, instinctively wanting to protect the sacred nature of what had occurred. But Westland, hearing even the sanitized version, was electrified. "This is excellent progress," the billionaire's voice crackled over the satellite phone. "Continue exactly as you have been. I'm sending Dr. Reynolds to observe tomorrow." "No," Ethan said firmly. "Any change in routine or personnel will set us back. I need to maintain consistency." There was a telling pause before Westland responded, his tone noticeably cooler. "Very well, but I expect daily detailed reports from now on. You have 5 days remaining in our agreement, Miller. Make them count." After disconnecting, Ethan gazed into the dying embers of his fire. The weight of his situation pressed upon him. 5 days to gentle a wild stallion that had taken 10 days just to establish initial contact with. And even if he succeeded, could he trust Westland to honor their agreement about Thunderbolt's future care and handling? His troubled thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of an engine, unusual in this remote area, especially after dark. Rising to his feet, Ethan scanned the horizon and spotted headlights moving along a distant ridgeline, following a rarely used fire road that skirted the edge of federal land. Curious, he retrieved his binoculars from his pack. Through the powerful lenses, he could make out 3 vehicles, large SUVs with specialized equipment mounted on their roofs. They were moving slowly, stopping periodically as if conducting some kind of survey. A chill ran down Ethan's spine as he recalled his father's words about mineral deposits in the area. What if Westland wasn't waiting for the federal land designation to change? What if he was already preparing for mining operations, anticipating approval? The implications were staggering. If those vehicles were conducting unauthorized mineral surveys on protected land, it could be a serious federal offense. But more importantly for Ethan, it suggested Westland's interest in Thunderbolt was indeed part of a larger, more troubling agenda. As the vehicles disappeared over the ridge, Ethan made a decision. Tomorrow, he would continue his work with Thunderbolt, but at the first opportunity, he needed to investigate those vehicles and gather evidence of exactly what Westland was planning for these pristine wilderness areas. The fate of more than one magnificent stallion hung in the balance. Dawn painted the eastern sky in bands of gold and crimson as Ethan sat by his small campfire, waiting. The morning ritual had become sacred to him. Coffee brewing in the battered pot, a handful of Joseph's herbs ready to cast upon the flames, and the anticipation that tightened his chest with each passing minute. Would Thunderbolt come again? The sound of soft hoofbeats answered his unspoken question. Ethan remained still, eyes lowered in the non-threatening posture he'd adopted. When he finally looked up, his breath caught. Thunderbolt stood merely 15 feet away, closer than his initial approach the previous day. Behind him, partially hidden in the morning mist, his entire band of mares watched with alert curiosity. "Good morning," Ethan said softly, his voice barely carrying over the gentle crackling of the fire. "I was hoping you'd come back." The stallion's ears flicked forward, capturing each word. Ethan sprinkled the herbs onto the flames, releasing the now familiar sweet smoke into the air. As before, Thunderbolt inhaled deeply, his posture relaxing almost imperceptibly. For nearly an hour, they existed together in this tenuous harmony, the wild stallion gradually circling closer while Ethan maintained his seated position, speaking occasionally in that same gentle tone. When Thunderbolt finally extended his muzzle to touch Ethan's outstretched palm, the contact lasted several seconds longer than the day before. Progress, measured in heartbeats, and held breath. As the sun climbed higher, Thunderbolt retreated with his mares, disappearing into the tree line. Only then did Ethan allow himself to move freely, his body stiff from maintaining the same position for so long. He recorded the interaction in his journal, noting every detail with scientific precision, despite the emotional impact of the encounter. His satellite phone buzzed, Westland, demanding an update. Ethan provided the facts without embellishment, conscious of revealing too much to a man whose motives he increasingly distrusted. 4 days remaining, Miller, Westland reminded him before disconnecting. I expect tangible results. The reminder of his dwindling timeline intensified Ethan's determination. After securing his camp, he saddled his horse and rode toward the ridge where he'd spotted the mysterious vehicles the previous night. The journey took most of the morning, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging as he approached the boundary of federal wilderness land. Near the top of the ridge, Ethan found what he was looking for: tire tracks cutting across the fire road and continuing into an area clearly marked with "No vehicular access" signs. Following the tracks, he came upon a small clearing where the earth had been disturbed in multiple locations. Small flags marked various spots, and core samples had been extracted, leaving neat cylindrical holes in the ground. This was no casual trespassing. This was a professional mineral survey, conducted illegally on protected federal land. Ethan dismounted, taking photographs with his phone's camera. He collected one of the small metal tags that had fallen from a flag. WML was stamped on one side, likely standing for Westland Mineral Limited. Conclusive evidence that Westland was behind the illegal survey. His suspicions confirmed, Ethan rode back to camp, his mind racing. The connection was now clear. Westland wanted Thunderbolt and his band removed from this territory, not just for their breeding value, but because their presence helped maintain the land's protected status. With the wild horses gone, one significant obstacle to mineral development would be eliminated. Back at camp, Ethan found Cody waiting for him, sitting casually on a fallen log with a thermos of coffee. "Westland sent you to check on me," Ethan stated, not bothering with greetings. Cody shrugged, unapologetic. "Wanted to see your progress firsthand. Can't blame him. It's a lot of money riding on a teenager's word." Ethan secured his horse, debating how much to reveal to the wrangler. Cody had been decent to him, but his loyalty was ultimately to Westland. "How much do you know about Westland's mineral interests in this area?" Ethan asked, deciding to test the waters. Something flickered in Cody's eyes, caution perhaps, or concern. "Enough to know it's not my business," he replied carefully. "Same as it's not yours." "It becomes my business when it affects Thunderbolt," Ethan countered. "I've seen the survey markers up on the ridge. Illegal work on federal land." Cody's expression hardened. "Be careful, kid. Westland doesn't respond well to people poking into his affairs." "Is that a threat?" "A friendly warning." Cody stood, brushing off his jeans. "You're good with horses. Maybe the best natural talent I've seen. Don't waste it by getting involved in things beyond your control. After Cody departed, Ethan sat by his fire, turning the metal tag over in his fingers. He needed to report what he'd found, but to whom? The Bureau of Land Management? The Forest Service? Would they even act on information from a 17-year-old ranch hand? His satellite phone felt heavy in his pocket. One call could set events in motion that might stop Westland's plans, but it could also end any chance of helping Thunderbolt. The conflicting loyalties tore at him. Duty to the law, commitment to the wild stallion, obligation to his family who desperately needed the money he'd been promised. As twilight descended, Ethan was still wrestling with his decision when movement at the edge of camp caught his attention. There, silhouetted against the darkening sky, stood Thunderbolt. The stallion's appearance at this unusual hour startled Ethan. In all their previous interactions, Thunderbolt had approached only in the early morning. Yet here he was, seeking Ethan out as darkness fell. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, remaining seated. "Wasn't expecting you now." Thunderbolt nickered softly, a sound so gentle it seemed impossible from such a powerful creature. The stallion approached deliberately, stopping just a few feet from where Ethan sat. In the fading light, his copper coat glowed like embers, his eyes reflecting the small fire's flames. Slowly, Ethan reached for the pouch of herbs, sprinkling them onto the fire. The familiar sweet smoke rose between them, and Thunderbolt lowered his head, breathing deeply. Then, in a moment that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life, the stallion took the final step forward and gently rested his muzzle against Ethan's shoulder. The touch was feather-light, but electrifying. Ethan remained perfectly still, scarcely breathing, as Thunderbolt maintained the contact. Seconds stretched into minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and their synchronized breathing. With infinite care, Ethan raised his hand and placed it against the stallion's powerful neck. The muscles beneath his palm quivered, but Thunderbolt didn't pull away. This wasn't just tolerance or curiosity. This was trust, freely given. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, tears blurring his vision, "for trusting me." When Thunderbolt finally stepped back, Ethan felt the absence like a physical loss. The stallion regarded him for another long moment, then turned and melted into the gathering darkness. Ethan sat motionless by the fire long after Thunderbolt had gone, the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on his shoulders. The connection they'd formed was real and profound, all the more reason to ensure the stallion's future safety. His decision crystallized in that moment. He would continue working with Thunderbolt, building on the trust they'd established. But he would also gather evidence of Westland's illegal activities, creating leverage to ensure the Billionaire honored their agreement about the stallion's care and handling. The next morning, Ethan was up before dawn, preparing for Thunderbolt's visit with renewed purpose. When the stallion appeared with his band, the connection between them had deepened tangibly. This time, Thunderbolt approached without hesitation, allowing Ethan to stroke his neck and shoulder for several minutes. Throughout the day, Ethan documented each interaction with meticulous care, creating both a scientific record and personal testament to what was happening between them. That evening, he used the satellite phone to make a carefully worded call to his father, encoding his message about Westland's illegal surveys in language that would seem innocent to anyone monitoring the communication. Jack understood immediately. "I'll make some inquiries," he promised, discreetly. 3 days remained in Ethan's agreement with Westland. 3 days to fully gentle a wild stallion that most experts would say required months of gradual conditioning. Yet Ethan felt oddly confident. The traditional timelines didn't apply to what was happening between him and Thunderbolt. This was something rare and accelerated by their unique connection. On the morning of the third-to-last day, Ethan prepared for the most significant test yet. After Thunderbolt's now routine morning visit, Ethan brought out a light halter, not to capture or restrain, but as the next step in their trust-building journey. The stallion eyed the unfamiliar object warily, nostrils flaring as he scented the leather. "It's okay," Ethan murmured, holding the halter where Thunderbolt could clearly see and smell it. "No tricks, just another step." For nearly an hour, Ethan simply held the halter, allowing Thunderbolt to investigate it on his terms. The stallion's curiosity gradually overcame his wariness. When he finally allowed Ethan to gently touch his face with the halter without pulling away, it felt like a monumental achievement. Ethan was so focused on this delicate process that he almost missed the sound of approaching vehicles. Almost. The rumble of powerful engines shattered the morning stillness. Thunderbolt's head snapped up, ears pinned back in alarm. Before Ethan could react, the stallion whistled a warning to his mares and bolted, the band disappearing into the trees within seconds. Heart pounding with frustration and anger, Ethan turned toward the sound. 3 black SUVs crested the nearby hill, driving directly toward his camp with obvious purpose. The lead vehicle stopped a few yards away, and Harrison Westland stepped out, his expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. "Miller," he called, surveying the now empty meadow. "I decided it was time to see your progress in person." He gestured to the tree line where Thunderbolt had vanished. "Though it appears I've interrupted something significant." Ethan's hands clenched into fists as he struggled to control his anger. All the careful work, the painstaking trust building, potentially destroyed in an instant by Westland's impatience and arrogance. "You've ruined weeks of progress," Ethan said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. He was just starting to accept the halter. Westland removed his sunglasses, his cold blue eyes assessing Ethan with clinical detachment. "Unfortunate timing, perhaps, but our agreement ends in 2 days, and I needed to evaluate the situation personally." As the billionaire spoke, 2 more men emerged from the second vehicle, Garrett and another executive Ethan didn't recognize. From the third SUV came Dr. Reynolds, looking uncomfortable, and a man in the uniform of the Bureau of Land Management. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, suddenly wary of this unusual gathering. Westland's smile didn't reach his eyes. "A change of plans, Miller. One that may interest you greatly." Westland gestured to the BLM official, a stern-faced man with salt-and-pepper hair. "This is Regional Director Morgan. He's here to witness something rather extraordinary." Ethan's wariness deepened. "What exactly?" "The creation of the Thunderbolt Wild Horse Preserve," Westland announced, his voice taking on the polished cadence he likely used for press conferences. 50,000 acres of protected habitat, established through a partnership between Westland Enterprises and the Department of the Interior. Ethan stared in disbelief. "I don't understand." Director Morgan stepped forward, extending a folder containing official-looking documents. "Mr. Westland has proposed donating a significant portion of his mineral rights in this region to create a permanent sanctuary for the wild horse population, particularly the rare Kiger Mustang bloodline." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ethan's feet. This was the absolute last thing he'd expected from the ruthless businessman who'd been conducting illegal surveys just days ago. "Why?" Ethan asked, looking directly at Westland. "Why protect the horses when you were planning to exploit these lands?" A flicker of irritation crossed Westland's face at Ethan's bluntness before his practiced smile returned. "Market conditions change, Miller. The minerals here are valuable, but extracting them has become politically complicated." He adjusted his expensive watch. Sometimes the best business decision is to pivot, in this case, toward conservation. Dr. Reynolds approached, her scientific demeanor softened by genuine excitement. "It's unprecedented, Ethan. The preserve will allow for non-invasive research while protecting the horses in their natural habitat. Your work with Thunderbolt has proven we can interact with these animals without disrupting their essential wildness." Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of this sudden reversal. Then a particular phrase Westland had used echoed in his memory: politically complicated. Understanding dawned as Ethan recalled his encoded conversation with his father about the illegal surveys. Jack must have made those discreet inquiries to people with significant influence, perhaps even to Director Morgan himself. "This is damage control," Ethan said quietly, meeting Westland's gaze. "Someone found out about your unauthorized surveys on federal land." The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Westland's expression hardened. Director Morgan shifted uncomfortably, confirming Ethan's suspicion without words. "Let's call it a mutually beneficial resolution," Westland replied, his tone carrying a warning. "The government gets a wildlife preserve without spending taxpayer dollars. The horses get protection. My company receives excellent publicity and valuable tax benefits." He stepped closer to Ethan, lowering his voice. "And you, Miller, get the remaining payment we agreed upon, plus a permanent position as the preserve's head wrangler, if you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's handed to you." The implied threat was clear: accept this version of events or face consequences. Before Ethan could respond, a flash of movement caught his eye. At the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by trees, stood Thunderbolt. The stallion hadn't fled as far as Ethan had thought, instead circling back to observe the intruders from a safe distance. Seeing the magnificent animal standing wild and free, copper coat gleaming in the morning sun, something crystallized in Ethan's heart. This wasn't just about a job or money anymore. It was about protecting something rare and precious. Not just Thunderbolt, but the freedom and dignity he represented. "I'll need to see the preserve proposal in detail," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Including guarantees that the horses will remain wild, not rounded up for your breeding program." Westland's eyebrows rose slightly at the teenager's audacity. "The official announcement is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Your input would be valuable but not essential." "Actually," Director Morgan interjected, "having the young man who established contact with the stallion involved would add significant credibility to the project." He turned to Ethan. "Your documentation of the herd's behavior patterns would be invaluable for the preserve's management plan." Westland conceded with a tight nod. "Fine. Come to the ranch this evening to review the proposal and prepare for tomorrow's announcement." As the group prepared to depart, Dr. Reynolds lingered. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I believe this is the best possible outcome for Thunderbolt. Your approach proved what many of us have argued for years, that conservation doesn't have to mean complete separation between humans and wild species." Ethan watched the vehicles disappear over the hill before turning his attention back to the tree line. Thunderbolt had vanished, but Ethan sensed he hadn't gone far. "It's okay," he called softly to the seemingly empty forest. "They're gone now." For several minutes, nothing moved. Then, like a ghost materializing from the shadows, Thunderbolt emerged. The stallion approached cautiously, his trust damaged but not destroyed by the morning's disruption. Ethan remained perfectly still, murmuring gentle reassurances. When Thunderbolt finally came close enough to touch, Ethan felt tears stinging his eyes. "I promised I'd protect you," he whispered, placing his palm against the stallion's muscular neck. "And I will." That evening, Ethan arrived at Westland Ranch with his father beside him, a condition he'd insisted upon before agreeing to participate in the press conference. Jack's steady presence helped Ethan navigate the complex legal documents outlining the preserve's establishment. With Director Morgan as witness, Ethan negotiated additional provisions. No helicopters would be used in monitoring the herd, interactions would be limited to methods that respected the horse's natural behavior, and most importantly, Thunderbolt and his band would never be captured or removed from their territory without extraordinary circumstances and multiple approvals. "You drive a hard bargain for someone your age," Westland remarked after the final documents were signed. "You could have a future in business if ranching doesn't work out." "I'll stick with horses," Ethan replied. "They're more straightforward about their intentions." The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the press conference that would announce the Thunderbolt Wild Horse Preserve. Journalists and photographers gathered at a viewpoint overlooking the valley where the wild horses roamed. Ethan stood uncomfortably beside Westland as the billionaire delivered a polished speech about conservation, heritage, and corporate responsibility. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he abandoned his prepared statement and spoke from the heart about his connection with Thunderbolt, the importance of preserving wild spaces, and the delicate balance between human interaction and wilderness protection. His simple eloquence captivated the audience more effectively than Westland's practiced rhetoric. As cameras flashed and questions flew, Ethan caught his father's proud smile from the sidelines. Whatever Westland's true motives, genuine conversion to conservation, or merely a strategic pivot to avoid scandal, the outcome would protect Thunderbolt and his kind for generations to come. That afternoon, after the media circus had dispersed, Ethan returned alone to his camp in the valley. He'd been officially named the preserve's first field researcher, with a salary that would help stabilize his family's finances without requiring them to sacrifice their ranch. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, a familiar sound reached his ears, the soft approach of hooves on grass. Thunderbolt appeared at the edge of the clearing, his band of mares behind him. Ethan sat quietly by his small fire, sprinkling the last of Joseph's herbs onto the flames. The sweet smoke drifted toward the stallion, who nickered softly in recognition. This time, Thunderbolt approached without hesitation, coming to stand beside Ethan as naturally as if they'd been companions for years rather than weeks. The stallion lowered his proud head, gently pressing his muzzle against Ethan's shoulder in what felt remarkably like affection. For a long while they remained that way, the boy and the wild horse, connected by something that transcended the usual boundaries between human and animal. No halter bound the stallion, no fence contained him. He stayed by choice, a free creature bestowing the gift of his trust. Eventually, as twilight deepened into dusk, Thunderbolt lifted his head and gazed toward the open valley. Ethan understood without words. The stallion had a family to lead, a territory to patrol, a wildlife to live. "Go on," Ethan said softly, rising to his feet. "I'll be here tomorrow." With a final nudge against Ethan's chest, Thunderbolt turned and trotted toward his waiting mares. At the edge of the clearing, the magnificent stallion paused, looking back at the human who had first saved him from barbed wire and then helped secure his freedom for good. In that moment, silhouetted against the fading light, the copper stallion seemed to embody something essential and precious, the untamed spirit that still existed in these last wild places, resilient, despite all odds. Then, with a toss of his flowing mane, Thunderbolt led his band into the gathering darkness, disappearing like a living flame among the shadows. Not truly gone, Ethan knew, but simply continuing his age-old journey across the landscapes that belonged to him as much as to any human. Ethan remained standing long after the horses had vanished, watching stars appear one by one above the mountains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in balancing preservation with research, in navigating the complex politics of the preserve, in ensuring Westland honored both the letter and spirit of their agreement. But tonight, in this peaceful moment between day and night, Ethan savored the simple truth at the heart of everything that had happened. Sometimes, the most important boundaries aren't the ones we create with fences or laws, but the ones we honor through respect and understanding. A wild horse had taught him that, and it was a lesson he would never forget.